hopefully it's not the sign of things to come, and it was just an
Uh-oh.
accident.
Is the little plane in Philly or another little plane here about?
Just a little plane in Philly.
Okay, that's a medevac helicopter, medevac jet, which the medevac world, special helicopters, it has a history of higher than average risk taking, but not the jets. I mean, medevac jets do crash, and I can't remember one in the last 2 years crashing that was as serious as this one. But the NSP will do their full press on this, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure they will. I hope. It's some people are, I guess, giving some hypotheticals that it could have been foul play, but you don't think so?
It's way too early to tell. The one thing is that certain, there are a bunch of neighborhood cameras that showed the moments of the aircraft, and it was definitely descending almost straight down at a high speed, which says to me that it was no longer, well, the dynamic services weren't working. That is, either in an attitude where it couldn't recover, it was just plunging straight down, or there was some sort of failure, structural failure, or control failure for the crash. But again, this is something that will be found out in the investigation. My concern is that the type of flight this was, it may not have much in the way of a black box recorder on board. Depending on on how they were operating it, they
Yeah,
may not be required to have a cockpit voice recorder or flight data recorder. So again, that will be found out in the next few days. There was a serious fire after the crash, so even if there was a black box type device, there's always the risk of impact or fire damage after a crash like this one.
yeah, yeah. It was a pretty big explosion. That was quite a cloud of fire that went in the air. So, yeah. Well, hearts go out to those who and I'm sure there's going to be more victims as they, of this as they go through. I mean, it hit like a neighborhood area, didn't it? I mean, it was
Yeah, so it's very likely there's going to be potentially other casualties in the immediate block or two around that.
whew, yeah. I couldn't imagine looking up and here comes a plane. You know, well, I tell you, it's I'm somebody who's always been afraid to fly. I've never flown. Just the thought of it rattles my bones. Then the stuff like this happens, and it's just I don't know if it's not connected to the U.S. I guess I don't go there.
Well, that's basically the well, I mean, having been in the aviation safety business for 30 plus years, long ago I got out of the habit of trying to convince people, oh, it's safe to fly, because the way I define it, risk is measurable. If you jump out of an airplane with a parachute, doesn't matter if you believe it's safe or not safe, the risk is essentially the same. It's just a perception of risk. Now, some people jump out of airplanes with parachutes all the time, and they love it. More power to them. I like to have my fun doing something else.
Yeah,
And the safety aspect of flying commercial airliners, I can throw numbers at you until the cows come home, saying, well, the risk is so low. Yeah, it's not low enough. If it's not zero for some people, it ain't low enough.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got a couple friends, and they go to a place like the Philippines and stuff, and they'll, and you're over that ocean for a long time. I I tend to watch these documentaries, and there's one I watch. It's aviation crashes, and they go over how it happened and they reenact it. And there's a lot of them. And it's and sometimes when these things happen, they say, well, it's safer than a car. I don't know. I've been in a lot of car accidents, and I've been lucky. It's but when you're in the air, when you're at 30,000 feet in the air, and things go wrong, you don't have much of a chance. You just don't. I don't think even over the water. So yeah, but I mean, to each their own. I'm probably missing out on something good. But I'm just afraid that I'd get in the plane and they'd have to land it because of me, and it wouldn't be good. so, so tell me a little bit about. Well, I guess your career, how you got going, what interested you to go this way, and in the close counters with the UAPs. Definitely want to hear about that.
Boy, there's one I just discovered about 3 days ago that we'll talk about.
Okay.
Aviation-wise, I grew up around a part of the country in South Texas where there's plenty of aviation going on. It was the Vietnam War, and there were several military bases, two of which were doing a lot of flight training. So there's always aircraft flying over, and I remember distinctly, junior high and elementary school, if you have those old Vietnam era Hueys coming directly at you at low altitude, they were so loud, and the thump, 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 thump. We'd have to stop talking for a few seconds. As the windows would rattle, the helicopter would fly over, we go back to class. So that thought that was kind of normal until I grew up and realized that it doesn't happen in most communities. But that and the space program got me interested in aviation as a possible career. By the time I got to high school, though, you had a huge rollback in the aviation business. The Vietnam War wound down, the space program wound down. There were several major transport projects, including the U.S. version of the Concorde, that got canceled. So across the industry, there were tens of thousands of engineers and what have you hitting the streets, not having any luck finding jobs. And I thought, I still want to go in aviation, but I don't want to be unemployed. So I actually went to school for engineering in computer science and electrical engineering, thinking this computer thing might actually go someplace one day. And point of fact, I did have a couple of stints in the computer world, of the high-tech world. And one of the things I did, which was not something I expected, years after I'd been in aviation, I'd been a flight test engineer in the Air Force. I'd been working at Boeing as a safety engineer on several projects, including the 777, and was supporting the accident investigation group they had there at Boeing, and did a lot of analysis of data. The internet came along in like 94, I think it was. We actually had desktop computers put on our desks for the first time. And the crude version of the internet that was around back then was kind of fascinating. Wasn't much going on. Mostly big organizations like the FAA and the NTSB had something online, but it was very clunky, very hard to get data. But it was a whole lot easier than mailing off for stuff from DC or playing phone tag trying to find somebody who could figure out which manual it is I need to get and send it to me. It's like, hey, this internet thing might go someplace. So I started my website, airsafe.com, back in 96. And 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks after I launched it, Flight 800 happened.
Ooh.
And that's when I got introduced to the internet as a news source versus traditional news, because I literally had a 20-fold increase in traffic from one day to the next. And I thought, maybe if I put more stuff here about plane crashes, as opposed to really dry engineering stuff about risk and whatnot, I might get more traffic. So from that point, I had a two-track system when it came to my online work. I would still do the hardcore engineering things, talk about trends in the industry, talk about the details of accident investigations, and I would give people very detailed stuff about the stuff in the news. 20 years ago, if something like this week happened, I would have dropped everything, spent a couple of days putting new content together, putting things out there, and starting 20 years ago, even putting audio podcasts out there. Now, there are an untold number of very, very good people and a whole lot of clowns who put stuff out there immediately. So I don't feel the need to do so anymore, because the internet is now such a go-to place that I'm not like a guy in the wilderness anymore. There's like dozens of folks, some of whom, I respect highly and have even been on shows with, television shows like the ones you like on cable. And they do a great job. So I have a very narrow niche where I talk about some things in great detail, and I leave the rest for other people. And in the last few years, one of the things I talk about in great detail is UAPs. Not where they're from or who's driving them or anything, but UAPs as an aviation safety issue, which I was looking at as far back as 2006. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chicago event in 2006. He basically had something.
No,
big disc shaped out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, tell me about it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Well, you heard of the Phoenix Lights in '97?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That was pretty dramatic. That was huge. The whole city saw it. But 9 years later, in 2006, you had a cloudy day in Chicago. It was like 1,800-foot overcast, and suddenly this UFO-looking thing is floating right above Gate C-17 at Chicago. This is like a United gate. There were multiple people on the ground, including airport employees and airline employees, who saw this thing. And it punched through the clouds, left a hole in the clouds, disappeared. Chicago Tribune had a print story about it the other day, and they said later it was like the most visited web page they ever had. And it was something where it was clearly something that was not a traditional aircraft. Clearly there in a place where it shouldn't be. And the thing that got me going was there was no response by the FAA, no response by FBI, no response by the NTSB, at least no public response. Here it is, you have something, dozens of witnesses, massively reported by the media, and the official organs of the government that are supposed to watch over the skies did nothing. Now, at the time, I was out of Boeing, and I was doing a lot of my own work, and some of the things I did on the side was look at interesting things in safety, or things that really got me upset.
Yeah.
This was in the latter category. And rather than getting mad, I thought, how can I use what skills I have to bring to bear those skills and understand it better? Now, 6 years before, I'd actually had a book published from an engineering publisher called Understanding Aviation Safety Data. And it wasn't about equations as much as it was, how do you systematically go about asking and answering questions? Because in my career at Boeing, I would get all kinds of questions, many of which could not be answered by statistics that are already out there. I couldn't just look up a book from the FAA and answer the questions. Things like, okay, we have these birds hitting these engines. We have damage happening in these engines. What can you say about the likelihood of this new engine, bigger, different airports, having the same effect on the engine? Well, that's a whole lot of conjecture, a whole lot of probabilistic analysis. And I figured out ways to do it, not the technical stuff, because that's one thing. The hardest part of doing analysis was trying to understand what the question was. When you have a high-level manager saying, I want to know something about this issue, they would describe it using regular language like a business person would. They wouldn't have a knowledge of the detailed nuances of what I have to do. They would pose a question or pose a problem. Tell me more about this thing. Well, I might have to sit down with them and ask them, what do you mean by this thing? And so I talk with them, and really that thing they're talking about is three different things. It's like, okay, I have to find out about these three different things in order to answer his big question. So basically, as I like to describe it, I would translate their English into math, do the math, retranslate it back into English, and then package it in a way that, in many cases, a manager can present with confidence. All the facts are there, all of the major points are there, and he can do it in 5 minutes or less. It's not going to explain the whole problem.
Yeah.
But the issue with management is often they have to make decisions and take action, and they need the information to do so. If you sort of browbeat them and say, no, you have to explain it this way, like I did in class when I was in graduate school, otherwise they won't understand everything that's going on. Well, I had to realize sometimes you need to know everything that's going on, sometimes you don't. Mm-hmm. The key is which one is which, and how do you approach those two situations. Also at Boeing, we had to, still do, I don't work there anymore. I left, 25 years ago. But Boeing has then and now a global fleet of aircraft and other services that span the globe. Some of the planes that are out there flying are Boeing aircraft that are 50 years old. Some are fresh off the assembly line. Yet when a problem happens on a plane, it might have an impact on the rest of the fleet. Yeah. You say, well, what if you have a 40-year-old 737 that's no longer producing that model, because 737 MAX is the current one. Let's say it's a 737-300. Hasn't been produced since the 1980s or 90s. Something happens to it. Why should Boeing care? Depends on what happened to it. If it's something that happens to be potentially a problem on current production aircraft, you bet that Boeing would be very interested in that, would like to understand completely what's the likelihood of this new problem manifesting itself in our existing fleet. Yeah. So how do we go from there to UAP? Let's go back to Chicago. there was not much going on in 2006. I looked around for some books and whatnot, looked around to see what the official approach of the FAA was, which was like today,